Now, very often on the LBC Legal Hour, I recommend that people go and consider mediation as an alternative to suing somebody, because suing someone is stressful, it's expensive, and it can take years, whereas mediation can be quick, cheap, and achieve a result that everybody is happy with. I'm speaking now with Vernon Hadida, who is Head of Dispute Resolution at Thomas Dunton Solicitors and is an accredited mediator and mediation training. Vernon, what's the difference between litigation and mediation? Good evening.
Well, good evening, Daniel. It's useful to consider actually that at the moment, mediation is in fact even more relevant than it's ever been, and it's great to hear you extolling some of the benefits there. But in the lockdown, a lot of us are a little bit more stressed or a little bit less secure. And that's a classic recipe for being more argumentative. We hear what people say to us, and we're more inclined to think it's more negative than was meant to be. So it's a real melting pot for misunderstandings. And in mediation, the object is to help people actually talk to people about that, to try and create a more trusting situation where people can actually really find out what actually happened in a situation or what somebody actually meant.
Are there any areas to which mediation is particularly well suited?
Pretty much everything but criminal, Daniel. So certainly neighbour disputes, a lot of benefits in family, happy to talk about those. Anything really where people would benefit from talking to each other. I mean, for instance, Gareth in the garage earlier, if they could only get together, they might actually find a solution which in fact could work for all of them. But too quickly we're inclined to think it's a big argument. We don't like the other person anyway. We think there's something wrong with the way they think. And we categorize people like that. And it makes it a lot harder to find a solution. And we romp off to the law and we end up in court. You've lost the very control that people are seeking to get. In an argument, a lot of it's about taking control in the end. We've all been there. The argument starts. It ends up becoming about who's seen to win. People taking control of the argument, even trying to take control of each other. And actually they give up that control because they give it up to a judge.
You mentioned Gareth earlier. Who was having problems with a neighbour who was trying to restrict parking outside the property. Assuming that he and his fellow residents want to find a mediator, what's the best way to go about locating, identifying and choosing a mediator?
Well, there's a great website these days, Daniel, civilmediation.org, or in Scotland it's scottishmediation.org.uk. And that has a whole list of mediators. You can see their background. You can see the sort of mediations they might do. Really choosing a mediator is like a lot of things. You want some sort of recommendations, often good, or certainly you need to choose an accredited mediator. And you'll only find accredited mediators on the civilmediation.org website. So starting off there is a good starting point. Otherwise, you've got local neighbourhood schemes. So, for instance, your council or a housing association may have a scheme going.
Are there any areas, you mentioned criminal, but any civil areas where you find that mediation doesn't work so well?
Sometimes a point of law does need to be established. Sometimes the parties actually have had a really good discussion about it. They really have understood each other's point. They understand why the other person feels so strongly about it. And for all that, they're just not going to find a solution because they actually disagree over the law. And as you know, sometimes, quite often the lawyers might disagree over the law, and the law itself is going to need a judge to decide.
Most importantly, Vernon Hadida, what's your success rate as a mediator?
Well, it's much vaunted that the success rate is 80%, Daniel, in civil mediations, and in family mediations, it's 70%. So success is a question of how you define it. That's another point.
Thank you very much. That was Vernon Hadida, the Head of Dispute Resolution at Thomas Dunton Solicitors and an accredited mediator and mediation trainer.